Badger Nation, is Bryson Green the breakout star for Wisconsin football in 2024? It's Gardner Fickle. I'm going to take you through all the analytics and let you know why I think it is Bryson Green who is going to be that guy, that Will Pauling, the breakout star for the Wisconsin Badger football team in 2024. So if you didn't catch it, I posted about this on Badger Notes, kind of diving deep into kind of all the aspects that go into this. But a new thing that I want to do this year as part of the content that I'm rolling out to all of Badger Nation is to really take it and more of talk through it with each of you. Instead of having you read and kind of look at all these charts and try to decipher it in your own ways, is really have me kind of talk you through how I'm thinking of it and really hear it firsthand from me. So getting into it, right? Why do I think Bryson Green is going to be our breakout player? First, when you kind of look at this data here, right, we're looking at the cumulative EPA or expected points added, which is really a metric that looks at kind of the change in state of field positioning in a football game, right? So let's just say 1st and 10 from the 25-yard line has an expected points of that drive of 0.92 points over the course of all of the data that's collected into these EPA models. That's kind of the starting point, right? So if you were to, gain 7 yards on the play, right, and you're in a 2nd and 3 from the 32, your EPA would be, let's call it 1.25, right? So the EPA that the quarterback and the wide receiver or running back in that situation gaining the 7 yards would have gained the differential in the 1.25 minus the 0.92, right? So what I'm capturing here is Bryson Green's cumulative EPA that he's gained over each of these games throughout the course of the season. So what you can see here is that he got off to a really rocky start, right? And I guess a decent start in Buffalo of a 1.15 EPA that he accumulated over the course of that game, but lost all of that in the Washington State game, lost even more in the Georgia Southern, and lost even more in Purdue. And then kind of that is the bifurcation point for Bryson Green in 2023, and really his connection with Tanner Mordecai really kind of took off in the Rutgers matchup and kind of in the beginning of the Iowa matchup. Then kind of stabilized or kind of had some up and down games in Illinois, a pretty decent game against Ohio State. And then obviously we kind of know what the Indiana and LSU games provided for Bryson Green from an output standpoint, and over 85 yards in each of those games and a touchdown in each of those games. And he really kind of started to solidify himself. Unfortunately, the Northwestern game hurt himself and didn't play for, I think, the entire second half and all of Nebraska and Minnesota games. So we really didn't get to see kind of where Bryson Green was trending to in the back half of the season. And I wonder how much that would change a lot of people's perspective going into 2024 of having seen him play in all of those 3 matchups, and how this chart would have looked very differently. And we could have seen his EPA get into the 15-20 range, where, for example, I think Will Pauling, his cumulative EPA was 42 points on the year. I don't quote me on that. I don't have it on top of hand, but right, just to kind of give you in perspective of how productive Will Pauling was this year. Bryson Green was kind of on track to do some similar numbers if you kind of look at it bifurcated on kind of post Purdue in that rocky start. And we'll get into a little bit more of why I think we saw some issues there, and really how we can exploit Bryson Green, or Phil Longo I should say, in 2024 to really drive some really good production. This is pretty much the similar chart, right? But just looking at it on a per target basis. So normalizing it a bit, but really this data is really telling us the same thing, right? Pretty good results to start off the year. And then really that Washington State through Purdue game, really a struggle point for Bryson Green, and really finding that connection point with Tanner Mordecai was a huge difficulty to start the year off, and probably why we got off to such a rocky start. Is we didn't really have any connection on the outside for Tanner Mordecai. No consistent threat that he could really utilize and take some pressure off of Will Pauling in the middle of the field to do some different things. So as Bryson Green started to come on, I think we started to see the offense start to tick a little bit. And obviously, there wasn't consistency across entire games, right? And I'll get into that a little bit more detail later. But really, the explosive plays that Green was able to provide were huge. And so we need to give him more opportunities to show that. And this is just kind of an interesting chart. I would say there's not a ton of signal within here, but as his targets went up, which is kind of the x-axis here, his EPA per target seems to have increased, right? With these four matchups there at the bottom being kind of the early part of the year, right? So if you look at post those games, as he increased his usage, right, or the amount that he got targeted, he really improved his EPA per target. And really what I'm trying to say here is that the more opportunities you give him, the more explosive plays he's going to make. And I'll get into that on this next slide. So what this is showing is Bryson Green's EPA distribution, right? So looking at all of his plays and targets throughout the season, right? Because I'm judging the wide receivers and running backs on every touch that they were intended to have, right? So if Tanner Mordecai threw the ball over Bryson Green's head, right, I'm kind of docking him equally to Tanner Mordecai in the amount of EPA that they're losing on that play. So just to kind of level set you, and I go into a little bit more detail in the post on Badger Notes there. But what I'm trying to show here is this is kind of a histogram of all of these plays, right? So they're bucketed into kind of the amount of EPA he's getting on each play, and what a long tail here to the right is showing that there's more explosive, high value EPA plays, right? So if you think about EPA, it's really a projection of what's your expectation at that point in time in the game, given you're down a distance, the time left in the game, all of these different factors of how the model is evaluating your expectation of points you're going to score at that given state in the game. And so when you're in a 3rd and 5 situation and you break a 20-yard gain for a first down, that has very drastic implications to your beginning state EPA and your ending state EPA. And really how kind of the analytics community is trying to judge football players is how much EPA are they generating, right? How many times in a game or over the course of a season, as we're looking here, is Bryson Green kind of making those big high value or really explosive plays where you're really changing the expectation of the drive to it's going to be a punt, right? There's really a low expectation or low value output of that drive to an expectation where there's points are going to be scored for the offense. And so really EPA is kind of the judgment of that. And this EPA distribution, you'd really like to see that long tail out and to the right, which means that you've got the higher amount of plays you can actually have out to the right. So an ideal world is, a huge distribution of high value plays. We know that's not necessarily going to happen in the game of football. But the more you can kind of see this chart skew to the right, the the more explosive and the more high value that player is. And so just to kind of give you perspective, this is Will Paulings, right? And so obviously there's a shift to the totally to the right here, as he doesn't have very many, if at all, very negative plays from an EPA standpoint. Obviously there's, um, incompletions of which he was a part of, and a lot of the times those are coming on third downs, and so there's some pretty high negative implications of missing on third down. But as you can see here, a very full distribution of really high value and explosive plays for Will Pauling. And just to kind of go back to the Bryson Green, right? Not necessarily as full, but you can definitely see the signs of. And obviously, he played 3 less games than Will Pauling, so wasn't quite able to generate as many of these high value plays. But just to kind of give you a sense, he has very explosive tendencies and abilities at the boundary outside wide receiver position. And I think that should be very exciting for Badger fans, for what we should expect from Bryson Green. I kind of want to shift into now, as I did in the piece, of what really went wrong in 2023 for Bryson Green. Obviously, he came in from Oklahoma State with probably the second most pedigree within that wide receiver room, second to Chimere Dike. Got edged out by maybe 50 to 100 yards in production there, and then a few less touchdowns, a couple less touchdowns, I believe, in 2022 seasons. But really what you can kind of see here is this is yards per route ran, which is really an efficiency metric, I would say, for wide receivers, of how many routes are you running, and then you kind of take the amount of reception yards that you're getting divided by how many routes you're running, right? So pretty similar to points per shot in basketball, yards per attempt for quarterbacks in football, pretty similar. And almost it may be even more of maybe a knock, or less than a yards per attempt. Yards per drop back would probably be a similar metric for quarterbacks. But again, just trying to look at, hey, what went wrong in 2023 versus 2022? Well, you can kind of see in the medium route concept, right? And so that's 10 yards to 20 yards of the depth of throw past the line of scrimmage, right? Any routes within that frame, or past the line of scrimmage, his yards per route ran on those routes was cut in half, even less so than that. And really a pretty similar story from the behind the line of scrimmage throws. He didn't really get a ton of opportunities there. And I'm interested to see next year if the outside or boundary wide receivers are even kind of a big component of that in Phil Longo's offense. There may be some data digging on there, if that's lack of connection, lack of performance there, or just the general scheme from Longo impacting kind of the difference there from 22 to 23. But really the big focus that I'm seeing is pretty similar production in short routes, and actually got a little bit better in efficiency on his deep routes. And so it was really in that medium target depth is where he struggled. And you see really all of those results in the reception percentage from 2022 to 2023. So again, almost cut in half to even below that from those intermediate medium routes in 2023 from 2022. So what happened in that time frame? Well, what's interesting is that this is a kind of a chart that I pulled to look at in these intermediate routes, right? So from the 10 to 20 yard range, what is the quarterbacks, right? So I pulled Tanner Mordecai, Braden Locke, Van Dyke, and Spencer Sanders to look at what's their on target percentage. And then, and that's on the y-axis there. And then on the x-axis is the average depth of target in that range. So what you can see is that Spencer Sanders pushed the ball downfield considerably more than Braden Locke and Tanner Mordecai. And that's Spencer Sanders 2022 information right there, with Mordecai, Locke, and Van Dyke's 2023. Is he pushed the ball considerably more downfield, but his on-target percentage wasn't very good, if we're going to be completely honest. And Braden Locke's is there was a lot to be desired from him in the intermediate routes from an on-target standpoint. But you can see Tanner Mordecai is obviously didn't push the ball very far downfield, but had very high on target percentage. And this is Power 5 quarterbacks from 2022 to 2023. And all of this data is from Sports Info Solutions, is my data source here. I don't have that called out, but that's where I'm getting this information from. And so what's interesting is, right, a very high on target percentage, you would expect then to see a relatively high reception percentage, as on target is essentially how often on your attempts are you kind of hitting that quarterback or the wide receiver, in stride, is kind of how SIS defines that metric. So to see a pretty high on target percentage and such a low reception percentage for Bryson Green tells me there was at least some sort of disconnect between those two, and specifically we saw that in the beginning part of the year. When you kind of dig into it a little bit deeper, what's interesting is that even though Mordecai had a pretty high on target percentage, in the 10 to 13 depth range past the line of scrimmage, he had actually his lowest on target percentage, which kind of is the inverse of what you would expect. You would probably expect the on target percentage to be diluted as your route depth increased. So just kind of some interesting things there. And then when you look at kind of the volume of his throws by route depth, a majority of Mordecai's throws came in that 10 to 13 yard range. And so maybe the inconsistency of his accuracy on those shorter intermediate throws came into balance with Bryson Green. And that's where that connection really just kind of faltered in the beginning part of the year. Can't fully explain it just because I don't have the in-depth tracking data that SIS is using. I'm really just kind of getting the back output of what they have to offer. So it's tough to look at the granular play-by-play information there of, how many of Bryson Green's targets were off target in this metric from Tanner Mordecai, and how much of that explains the lack of reception percentage and yards per route run in the intermediate space. So kind of an unknown there to help explain what went wrong in 2023 for Bryson Green. What did go right, obviously, kind of talked a little bit before about, his deep routes, right? So 20 yards plus down the field. His yards per route run increased from 2022 to 2023. Show that here, right? So he went from 7.76 to 10.4. And obviously a lot of big plays that he had in the Iowa game, the Indiana game, the LSU game, with some deeper shots downfield that he corralled in, really helped kind of solidify this number, and really kind of, if we go back to the cumulative EPA, right, and kind of those really high value plays and explosive plays, I would more consider those type, really helping his yards per route run and his EPA. But kind of going into here, this is his short route yards per route run. And then this is kind of taking a look at, across the lexicon of Badger wide receivers. And he was even more efficient than Will Pauling. Obviously, the percentage of short route targets that the Badgers had in 2023, Bryson Green only accounted for about 11%, whereas Will Pauling was over a third. So obviously you're going to see some degradation in your efficiency as your usage maintains. So to see Will Pauling up there at 6.07 really kind of shows the elite nature of his production in 2023. But really focusing on Bryson Green here is, the 7.52, even on 10% of the targets there, and how that compares to CJ Williams at 4.82, Vinny Anthony at 3.76, Chimere Dike at 6.00, all significantly below, and Skylar Bell at 4.24. Right. Hopefully we're going to see a significant increase from Trechka Kahuna there in 2024. But Bryson Green and then Quincy Burrows there too did kind of flash in the opportunities that he was given. But what's interesting when you look at these short routes is that over a majority, close to 60% of that production is coming after the catch, right? So again, it kind of really shows some of that explosive nature that Bryson Green has is after the catch, right? When the ball's in his hands, he's going to be able to go and make some plays. And so we think about the free access game and what Phil Longo is trying to do in the RPO. I mean, you saw Chimere Dike get a lot of opportunities in some of those routes, or kind of in the scheme, so to speak. Hopefully, in 2024, we'll see Bryson Green kind of take over Chimere's target, a lot of his targets, and hopefully we can see him continue to see this type of production after the catch, and really kind of see some really good efficiency in those short routes, free access game. To again, right in the free access game, you're hoping to take advantage of heavy boxes, right, where you've got a guy in space who can go make a play. And Bryson Green really proved he could do that in these short routes in 2023. And so I think it behooves Phil Longo to increase his usage in that game and really make it a focus for Van Dyke, to give Bryson Green a lot of those opportunities and see if we can't match this type of production after the catch in 2024. Because I mean, when you look at 2022 here, and try to take a peek behind the curtain, was this an anomaly 2023 where he was able to make a bunch of big plays? Well, I would say probably the anomaly was in those intermediate routes where he saw his yards after the catch production drop significantly, right? Is that a nature of kind of the route concepts he was able to play in, with Chimere Dike being the primary outside receiver for Phil Longo and the team in 2023. Was he given a lot of those opportunities on those deep cross, those deep dig, to make a play in space and have room to operate after the catch? Maybe he didn't have some of those opportunities, and that's where we really saw his performance degrade. But going back to the short routes, right, he had pretty similar production on those short routes in 2022. Actually improved his after the catch level of production from 22 to 23. So that tells me that, right, with another year under his belt, the game slowed down for him. He was able to make those short catches, establish himself, make himself present, and able to make a play on the DBs and get some more grass after the catch. And so I think that's going to be a huge weapon for Phil Longo in the Badgers in 2024. And so this all has me extremely excited for Bryson Green in 2024 and what he's going to be able to contribute to this Badger offense. And really kind of how I closed out the piece is it's going to be necessary to have that outside threat. And I think when I think back and was watching through some of the games last year, it's we still had a lot of heavy boxes, right? And teams really didn't respect, even though we came into the air raid system, the dairy raid, as Coach Anderson would coin it. but we really didn't see that paradigm shift in how defenses were playing us, and I think that had a lot to do in our inability then to take advantage of heavy boxes and some opportunities on the outside to go make some plays. Really impacted our offensive efficiency last year, and so I think it's going to be critical. Whether it's Bryson Green, Joseph Griffin coming in from Boston College, Quincy Burrows, what kind of step does he take? CJ Williams, obviously, Phil Longo kind of spoke highly of him in this offseason and kind of what he's done with his body, getting into better shape, beefed up a little bit to handle kind of the physicality of the Big Ten. Does he take a jump, right? Does his numbers drastically improve? Somebody has to. I think Bryson Green got off to a slow start in 2023, but I think he showed really what the ceiling is for him in kind of the back half of 2023, especially in the Indiana, Iowa games, Ohio State game, and obviously really shined in the LSU game. And you kind of look at his production over kind of from Rutgers on, right? You kind of normalize that over a 12-game season, and we're talking, 48 catches and over 700 yards over the course of a 12-game season. I'll tell you right now, if we get that type of production out of him from the outside receiver position, that's going to take a ton of pressure off of Will Pauling and Trechka Kahuna in the slot. Hopefully it'll lighten up some boxes for Malusi, Tawi Walker, and really open up the running game. And we can really see the offense start to get clicking like we saw in the bowl game. And hopefully that starts to feed, into the defense. And obviously, the pieces that Fickle, Tressel added through the portal this year at the linebacker positions. And hopefully we can get some more pressure on the quarterback, and all these things start to flow together. But really, I think the nexus, right? The kind of the person who's going to need to see production, or the position that's going to need to see production, is the outside wide receivers. And I think Bryson Green is poised, he's primed, he's ready to go and prove himself in 2024 to be the guy everyone expected him to be in 2023. That we didn't necessarily get to see all of that. I think we saw glimpses, obviously, in the back half of the season, some really explosive plays, some high value EPA plays. But really, we're going to need that for an entire season from him. But again, from what I can see in the data and kind of my interpretation of that data, is Bryson Green's going to be the guy for us in 2024 on the outside. And man, it makes me super, super excited to see him really thrive. Obviously, just kind of, if you're in tune to the Badger world, right, on the Camp podcast with Jesse Halprin or Zach Halpring and Jesse Temple, kind of with Brady Collins talking about Bryson Green. And then he was on Locked On Badgers talking about how much he's transformed his body even another level from last year. And so just makes me excited to see what kind of production we can see out of Bryson Green in 2024. So that's all I got for you today. Hope you enjoy this type of content. And hopefully it's, if you enjoy it more than kind of reading through on the Badger Notes site, I would encourage you to read that there. And, I go into a significantly more amount of detail. I don't want to sit here for 40 minutes, really kind of talking you through every little detail that you can't read in 5 minutes or so over on Badger Notes. So go check out the content there. But I'm hoping for each of these preseason series posts to kind of hop on here and talk you through all the charts from my point of view and kind of give you a little bit more of my voice. So let me know in the comments if you like this, or if you don't, if you want me to kind of buzz through a little bit quicker, coming up on 30 minutes here. So let me know, and hope you enjoyed. And again, follow me on Twitter, Guard Your Fickle, and then follow the entire team on Badger Notes, and everybody who's affiliated with there. We got everything covered over for you on the site, all things Badger sports. So thank you.